Okay.
Take it away, Sandy.
Okay, so welcome to the Monday night training for Through the Eyes of Authors. Our membership group, which meets for training every Monday night. We meet for a mastermind on Fridays. I spoke at the mastermind last week on my latest message, Be Visible. I'm very excited about it, continuing to develop it, and we'll be giving it at some of the virtual opportunities I have coming up, and I have told you all about those on Friday. So now, for tonight, we are not talking about me, we're talking about John. And John, I already said when Amy asked me if I could do tonight, she has to leave to go to a meeting of the Houston Writers Guild, and she asked me if I could stay on and be with John, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Comic Palooza. It's just been like my a goal, a dream of mine to do that for since I first heard of it, actually, and realized it was a Houston thing. So I'm so excited to get to hear. So we have John Simons with us tonight. And Julie, thank you for your networking and introducing John to Amy and having him here. John, I have your bio that you sent Amy, and so I'm not gonna read that or anything, but I did want to say that even though I'm not the geek that a lot of people here are, one thing that you and I have in common more than anything else is going to be marketing. I am a marketing person. When I see a great marketing campaign, I mean, it just stands out to me what a great job someone has done. When I see something that I'm like, oops, that's not necessarily, that wasn't necessarily a good marketing idea. But I love the whole concept of marketing. I believe without marketing, anything else we do is null and void. You can write a book, you can write the best book in the world, one that everybody would love to read. But if they don't know about it, they're not going to read it, and they're not going to find it unless you're doing the marketing to, and there's two different kinds of marketing, one where you bring people in and one where you push things out. And so anyway, you and I have that in common, John. He said that if his life was, and the things that he liked were a food, then marketing would be at the top of his list of things that he loves. So I love that. I want you to tell us a little bit more about your story. I'm all about people's stories. So why did you do Comic Palooza? When you, and then he ended up selling it in 2018. So that's another story. I'm just looking forward to all kinds of stories.
Okay, well, I'll try to do it quick and efficiently. So, first of all, just so that you know, most people know me as an event organizer, which I've been for a long time. And before that, I had a comic book store. But when I moved to Houston, I got my BA in English Lit at the University of Houston, and I was studying English because I wanted to study writing. And I used to write every night, and I was a member of a group called the Manuscriptors Guild. And the Manuscriptors Guild in the early 90s was the largest writing group in the city. And they met twice a month, and they'd have a speaker at the beginning of each meeting. And these speakers, they were writers, lawyers, agents, anybody connected with writing and publishing. And the writers often talked about marketing. It was very common because one of the first things you learned is you have to do the marketing yourself, right? Unless you're, John Grisham or something, you're doing it yourself. And some of the stories were simply phenomenal. They really impressed me a lot. And I learned a lot from it. And later, when I went and opened my comic book store with a couple of friends, we were really idiots, like we did everything wrong. But we had no money, right? You're supposed to have 6 months or a year's worth of money. We didn't have anything. And so we didn't have any money for advertising. So I drew on all these things that I learned about writers promoting their books. And a lot of these come down to what you would call cheap publicity stunts, but they were very effective. And I learned to start developing relationships with the press, for example. And so a number of years later, because I had my store for 16 years, a number of years later, I began to get very feeling like I needed to do something else or have other plans. And I spent some time building a business plan around doing a comic convention. And it was detailed. I spent 2 years researching comic conventions. And then, but I didn't have the money to do it because they're not cheap, you know, and I didn't want to do it the way I'd opened my store. And then I thought, you know, if I'm going to be ready for this, I need to start working on working toward it, even if I don't have the money now. So I thought I need to start doing events to start working with the press again, because I hadn't done that in a few years. So I did this one event to help promote local comic creators. And we did it in the lobby of a movie theater, right? So we would have all these authors set up, and it was the weekend that Batman: The Dark Knight came out, right? So it was going to be a success. There were going to be people there for it. And I called a few reporters, and I got them interested. And one of them said, what do you call this? And I'm like, what? It's just a thing. And I realized, oh, he needs a name for it. I'm like, oh, we're going to call it Comic Palooza. And so we went and we had the 6-hour signing, and it was really good. And then I got invited to do events at the West Oaks Mall. My store was across from the West Oaks Mall, and the West Oaks Mall did not have enough people coming in, and the manager there wanted to start bringing people in. So she was offering me space to do things. And I said, well, I can do the stuff you want me to do, but I just did this little event. I could do it again in the mall, and we could make it into a real convention. So Comic Palooza went from a 6-hour signing to a 2-day free comic book festival. And I got a surprising amount of press that first year. So since this is about marketing, I'll go ahead and I'll tell you one of the things that I did. And this is something that I learned directly from those talks that writers gave at the Manuscriptors Guild. One of the things I did, since I didn't have any celebrities and I didn't have any money to promote it, nothing like that, all the people who were going to be setting up these comic creators, they're all local. Nobody was big. I had no names. I asked them, well, you know, what part of town do you live in? You know, and one was up in Cyprus, and another was here, and another one was there. And every one of these little towns within Houston had its own, 8,000 or 10,000 circulation paper. And so I took each one of these people and I wrote a pitch for a story. And I looked up the paper in their area, and I found the editor, and I emailed it to them directly, this pitch, and I got like 4 or 5 of them had articles written about them because I made a pitch specifically about them for their local community paper. So this was very small, like I said, 4, 6, 8,000. But it turns out that all of these community papers were owned by the same company. And that's all across Houston. And the circulation, the cumulative circulation of these was larger than the Houston Chronicle. Once a week, they had a section in the paper that was citywide. It wasn't local. And I guess the editor-in-chief of this thing must have seen, oh, here's an article about this thing, and oh, here's another article about this thing. And so he called me up, and he did a front page piece on Comic Palooza because I had done these pitches. And I learned right there that being able to pitch, well, I already knew this because I had done pitches before. I had pitched stories for Midnight Comics as well. Being able to pitch a story is really, really important. And it's not it's not sending out a press release. Your press release is just a tool, right? And it's not a tool that gets you much unless you're huge, right? What you want is an idea of the coverage that you need, the coverage that you're looking for when you're talking to the press, to a newspaper journalist or a TV reporter or somebody on the radio. You need to have an idea of what you want, and you need to be able to convey to them why this is a story, right? Because people talk to them all the time, and they're not necessarily sitting around thinking about the press release you sent them. They get press releases all the time. But you call them up, you find people who are interested in you. Most people don't read comic books, right? So like for the Chronicle, I'm not going to send a press release to the editor. It'll be forgotten about. I went to the chron.com, searched, found people who had written about the topics I was interested in, comic books or whatever. Then I hunted them down. I found their email addresses, and I contacted them directly. Or if I couldn't find their email addresses, I'd call the paper, I'd ask for that reporter, and I would do it day after day after day. And eventually I'd get a hold of them and I'd pitch it. And if they said, oh yeah, I'll write about that, then you say, wow, do you want a press release for reference? Because that's what a press release is. It's your reference. It usually does not get you coverage from the media. It might, but it's like your resume. You go out and you try to get a job, you send resumes out. What kind of response do you get from that? It's much easier to talk to someone and then hand them your resume for reference. That is much more successful. So anyway, that was how I handled press a lot for that first year Comicpalooza. So our event, we went from about a dozen tables in the first year to 49 tables in the second year at the mall when it was a free 2-day event. And so it's still, this is small potato stuff, right? And I can tell you some other stories. It's kind of funny to me, but this is ridiculously small. But I had citywide coverage in print, and I was also interviewed on NPR for that year. And I didn't have anything that was a draw. Okay. As time went on, and the third year, Comicpalooza was in the George R. Brown. I had actually, I got a call just before I was about to do the second one. I got a call from someone in the Greater Houston Convention and Visitors Bureau, which doesn't exist anymore. And they wanted me to do my convention. They'd never seen it, never talked to me. They wanted me to do my convention in the George R. Brown. And that sounds like luck. How'd they find out about it? Blah, blah. I'd sent them a letter. I'd sent letters out to potential allies. And I pitched the idea that an event like this would be good for the city in a number of different ways. I never heard back. Turns out they'd had a meeting internally not long before that where this guy who had just moved back to the city, he was talking about how we needed this sort of event. And the guy I sent this email to, he was like, I know someone you need to talk to. So a lot of things in Comicpalooza really seem like luck. There's no luck. The only luck is the luck you make by planning forward, thinking about where you can recruit and marshal allies, and hopefully, following up with them, making contact. You have to be able to network with people. You have to think about who could be valuable to me to work with in the future. And you have to contact them. That was how I got into the George R. Brown. And then once I got there, we started having celebrities, and that made it much easier to get press to come. And that was by design. The purpose of getting celebrities was also that I could get free publicity, because I knew that the media would cover us a lot more easily when I had celebrities. So when you're writing a book and you're trying to sell a book, getting press is going to be hard. You won't have the advantage that I have, that I had of having celebrities come up. If I do a project now, I don't have celebrities involved. I got to do a lot more talking, and it's not as easy. You've always got to think about if someone's going to cover you, what story can you give them? And you have to come up with a compelling story. Celebrities just make that very easy. So anyway, moving along. So Comicpalooza, the whole promotional plan for it was based around an ecology of publicity. And we would have like 200 guests a year, right? A very small number of celebrity guests that everyone wanted to speak to. I was very lucky that I had somebody join the organization who had worked in film promotion for 12 years before she joined me. And so we worked very well together. But this is a very big job. When you get out and you're marketing something, if you are imaginative about how you do it, you literally could spend all your time every day marketing. There's always something that you can do, okay? It is a giant, endless pit that you can throw bonfires into and they will disappear, okay? So, and that's not a bad thing, right? It's a good thing, but it meant that I had to have a lot of help. And I was very fortunate that I did have someone. So none of that was just accidental either. And so this is what we came up with, and here's how it relates to you. We had something like 200 guests. Everybody wanted to talk to, whoever our big guest was, that year. And they wouldn't want to talk to other people. And writers, as a writer, it's very hard to get an interview. So we started thinking about when you're doing an event, every event wants the big outlets also. And people don't care a lot about the smaller outlets. So we developed a whole system where we took all our guests and all the media who applied to us, and we tried to match them up with as many story ideas and as many opportunities to write about the event and the people involved in it as possible. So for example, one thing that we did is we would have up to 3 press conferences at the event. And what that meant was that this would be like speed dating, where you've only got, or where you go and you meet a bunch of people and see if you connect. We would have a bunch of our smaller guests, which would usually include a lot of the writers, because we'd have 80 to 120 writers as guests each year. And we might have some of the smaller writers, some of the smaller actors, a variety of other people thrown in, some voice actors. And we'd have a bunch of media, and these would be smaller media. They'd be from smaller papers, they'd be from podcasts, they'd be folks like that. But they would be people who are largely both those guests are largely overlooked at events, and that those media are overlooked at events. And we would put them together, and they would do these quick series of quick interviews, and everybody got coverage. Everybody got something to write about. And there are advantages to that. One is anytime you are making contact with the media and developing a relationship, that's a potential area of growth for the future. People who are big in the media now, they started out small at some point. And the other thing is if you are going out and getting on podcasts, even though it's small, podcasts or smaller papers, you're still getting out there somewhere, and you still get to see you still get to see what it's like to do interviews. And it's very important to do practice interviews. So these are all very, very useful. And so one recommendation that I can make to you right now, because it sounds like some of you are looking to attend different events, when you are looking to go to an event, like I think, Julie, you were talking about possibly going to some convention, in East Texas. Is that right? I think. So what I would do if I were you in that case, if you decided you wanted to go, is I would approach the organizer and see if they're doing any promotions, promoting guests. What are they doing? You know, because if you go, you can promote that you're there. You can talk to the media and send them press releases or call them up and say, hey, I'm doing this. I'm going to be out there. Do you want to talk to me? Maybe you'll get nothing, but you might get something. And also, if you contact the promoter and it's a small promoter who doesn't know how to do that, which most of them do not, right? Most people do not do the crazy publicity stuff that I did. You might be able to swing a guest table. And if you get a guest table, that cuts down on your overhead for when you go. So those are tactics that you could do. And you want to do that stuff like a month out. A month out, contact the promoter, see if you can get put on as a guest, get him to comp it because you're going to promote his show, call the press, work the event, try to get press coverage out of it. And when you get press coverage for you, that also helps him. Use that to reduce your expenses. That is a tactic that you can use. Won't work for Comicpalooza. Unfortunately, that won't work for Comicpalooza, but I have some other tips for you for that. Anyway, so Comicpalooza was designed from the ground up to be a media engine, right? The whole thing about having 200 guests, and we would give away, what was it? I think by 2015 we gave away more than, it was either 400 or 600 press passes. When I was in charge of the media, you could go down on the floor any day at any time. And we were doing it for 4 days, right? So you could go down on the floor any day, any time, and you could find 2, 3, 4 camera crews any time of the day. And that's very, very unusual. So it was designed as a media engine. And that's very good for the guests. Now, a lot of you have heard about it and know that a lot of writers attend the event. So Comicpalooza was also designed, it was tailored a lot after Dragon Con, which has, it has tracks. We call them tracks too, and that's where you have a specific interest. And that interest is, it has all its own programming and its own guests, and it's like a convention within a convention. And because of my interest in writing, the fact that I'd been to a writers group, we put on a little conference once, I very much wanted to bring that to Comicpalooza. So I recruited somebody who turned out to be very good at it. And the idea was that we wanted to create 2 sets of programming for the convention. One was for writers and one was for the fans of the writers. And that way you can go and you can learn about writing from writers, and you can go as a fan and hear readings and whatever, or panels about your favorite work or whatever. And this is a very successful formula to do. This is done by very few conventions, okay? Most of them do not have the sensibility of the literary crowd or the creators. So, but this was something we went forward with. And so again, by 2015, I used 2015 a lot as like the baseline, because that was the largest year. And that was the last year where I was doing all of this without having a partner, right? So up until 2015, it was all me. So by 2015, we had, I think that was the year we had 120 authors as guests. It didn't mean they were getting anything for showing up. Didn't mean I was doing anything for them, but they were getting free passes to the convention, and they were involved in the programming, and they were listed on our website. Okay. they still had to take care of their own expenses, and that's pretty much normal for a lot of these places. But we would have like 100 of them, and we had something that we did that was different from nearly any other convention out there. Is we always worked with a bookstore, and the reason we would do that, we would bring this bookstore in, and the bookstore would take care of the book signing books, right? So this is a big thing. Like it's not the same if you're an indie author, but let's suppose that you've got 2 or 3 books that have come out and they're by Penguin. It is a real pain in the butt to try to staff a table. And then, you got to have, somebody's got to be there and watch your stuff while you're not there. And it's a big investment in your time, and So we got a bookstore, and all the authors who were published and distributed through bookstores, their books would be there at the bookstore booth, and all their signings would be right there, which made it a lot simpler when we had 100 and whatever authors showing up. But we also had tons and tons of indie authors because they have limited avenues for getting out and reaching their fans. Some of them would buy their own tables. Some would come under a publisher who might bring 3 or 4 authors. Usually they were all local guys. One decided he was going to do the publishing, and the others decided that he would publish them. And they might be small operations. They might be a little bit bigger. But there were some things that I learned about that for sales too. And I know that a number of you are thinking of attending Comicpalooza this year. So these are tips that I would really recommend. First of all, you can easily get in 6 authors to one table. You do not have to buy one table and be the author at the table. We've had lots of occasions where you've got, an entire, a collective that is represented at one booth. That actually makes it a lot easier because you can have multiple people staffing the booth, talking to multiple customers at the same time. You have more help setting it up, and you have greater product density. If you've got like 2 items on your table, it's not as interesting as if you have a bunch of them. So you can staff it better, and that gives you time to go and enjoy the event, which is something you'll probably want to do too. You'll want to be involved in whatever's going on, particularly like if you are on a panel or something like that. You don't want to have to worry about, are these guys going to remember to send a volunteer to my table? Do they send volunteers to the table? If you can work together as a group, you cut your costs and you make it a lot easier. Now, you may have to buy extra badges for a table. And specifics of that are up to the convention, but this is something that when you go to a convention to sell your book, unless you have some established audience already, or a lot of product or a lot of books, I really recommend that you go as a group and reduce your costs, make your labor easier, and make it easier to sell products. So the other thing, I'm sure you've all been to a lot of these, kinds of things where you've got authors sitting behind the table selling. So of course, to have bookmarks and stuff like that. I would also recommend that you find other kinds of merchandising methods that you can have. If you have one book, you're going to have a hard time making your money back. You have an investment, not just in the labor of your book and the printing costs. If you did it indie, you also have an investment of your travel and your stay, the cost of the table and your food, the inconvenience, lost opportunities. You could have been doing something else. So there's a big investment in it. And a lot of times, it is very helpful to have a variety of things that you can sell to someone, right? So having something you can give them is great. I would recommend maybe having badges or like buttons or something. Those can be popular. or if you have any little souvenir type things that go along with your books. If you are a fantasy or sci-fi writer or mystery novelist, you might have a series, and you can have enough IP where you might be able to have coffee mugs or T-shirts or some other kind of thing that goes along with it. Those also act as advertising for you. You probably won't make a lot of profit on things like that, but you never know. But I do recommend having things for different price points. Like it's nice having a soft cover and a hard cover, maybe a poster of something in the book, or the artwork for the cover, or various things like that. So those are a lot of my recommendations for at the con and how to make it a little bit cheaper. I would also suggest that this year you might have to manage your expectations quite a bit. Like for Comicpalooza, honestly, I would be surprised if they do not cancel Comicpalooza for this year. I could be wrong. They might keep it and do it, but I expect a very low attendance this year compared to previous years because of the pandemic. Part of that goes back to people not wanting to go out. I mean, I'm not going to go to it, even if they have it. But also, at this time, it is going to be very, very difficult to book celebrities, and celebrities are the driving force behind people going to events like that, right? So you might have somebody who they're going because somebody from the Avengers is signing, but they like science fiction. So they're in the artist alley and they're looking at the books and they buy a book from you. If you don't have that person from the Avengers there, well, that person may not be there either. So I'd be surprised if there was not a very large drop off in attendance at Comicpalooza this year. And so I would be prepared. Like if you have to make profit on an event, you're probably better off not going to the event and not risking it, because I think it's much more risky to attend an in-person event like that during the pandemic than it was beforehand. So anyway, that's the longest uninterrupted rant I've had in a long time. So I think that's all the stuff I can think of off the top of my head.
That was a lot of great information, though, John. Oh my God, that was great. And congratulations. I've never heard of anyone whose event started out and that quickly moved up to the George R. Brown. That's like almost unheard of, but congratulations. What a great success story that is. I do want to open it up for questions. So anyone have, I'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. But anyone have any questions for John, not only specifically about Comicpalooza, but about events as a whole? So anyone?
Well, I did ask a question in the chat about.
I'm sorry, Greg, I didn't see it.
How many indie authors do y'all currently get per show on average?
So I sold the event in 2018. So I am not privy to that information anymore. I was drawing between 80 and 120, 130. And you have to keep in mind that the more you draw for that kind of event, the better it is. Because every author tells their audience. And so you've got more and more reason for the people to come. And the other thing is, one of the biggest consumers of books, of new books, is writers. Writers love books. So it was a pretty good number. I don't know how many they have coming. So this is another thing that's well worth knowing. the way that event grew, the writers track, the way the writers track grew was by design. I knew what I wanted, and I had an idea of how to get it there. And I was not making this all up in my head. I already saw it at Dragon Con, and I knew enough about this sort of thing from being in the Manuscriptors Guild. I had an idea how to go from point A to point B, and it was working pretty well. We were probably about 25% of the size of Dragon Con's event, and that made us the largest Comicpalooza literary track, I believe, was the largest literary conference in Texas. Okay. The guy that I had running it, he had built up he built up a method and a lot of contacts and networking, and he quit. So he didn't want to work with them anymore, so he quit. So when they do this again, I don't know how much the person or the management handling the writer's track actually knows about running a writer's track anymore. Maybe they'll have a great person for it. I don't know. And I don't know what their goals are. I will tell you this. The writer's track was after the literary track. I'm sorry, after the celebrity Q&As. The literary track at Comicpalooza was the most well-attended set of panels in the convention. It had panels that were at 100% capacity on Friday at 10 a.m. on open, right? And that's really, really hard to do in that industry. So they appreciate it. I just don't know what their current goals are. And what my recommendation would be is to find out if because for this year, I know that the idea is for it to be smaller because of the pandemic. So my recommendation would be to look on the website and see if there is any information about a track coordinator. I don't even know how they do the public info. I used to have a track coordinator for each track, and you could deal with that person. And I don't know how public that is anymore. But what you should do is contact them and ask if you could speak to the track coordinator for the literature track. And then you can ask them questions like that yourself. And that is a great question.
I actually know the person that runs the literary department for Comicpalooza. So
who is it now?
I really don't want to say her name because she's in a group and she doesn't want to be recognized in that group. But okay. I know who she is, and she's been working on getting the panels for everybody this year. And
okay,
only 2 people submitted panels, so I don't know if what they're doing.
So a lot of that is possibly process. Well, okay, part of it. So we had a whole set of panels that we had I can't even think of the word now, but we had all the like the how-to panels, and then the business of panels, and then the fan panels. And so most of those topics were set, and we would just ask authors to sit in on those panels, right? So I don't know if she knows that the process used to be that we would solicit for those. And
I think they still have them, but in order to fill up some blank spots, they want people to put in suggestions for panels, and then that's how they do that.
Well, what we used to do is we would solicit for a certain number of them, the ones that we knew we wanted to have, and we would fill those up, and then we would have the posting for the call for panels, and people could make other suggestions, and you might get a few from that. Most of it was driven in the literary track, not in all of them, but in the literary track, most of it was driven by soliciting authors for it. First, you'd ask, you'd find out who wanted to be in it, and we'd get the guests, and then we'd start, asking them who wanted to be on these panels and fill it up like that. So there's potentially a process difference from last year. And then the other thing is, the pandemic. Who knows how many people are planning to show up this year? But
Yeah,
if you know her, I mean, you can ask her how many she's shooting for.
because San Diego actually just canceled today, and they're in July.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's pretty unlikely that they'll hold it. So.
Is that the impression you're getting from the people you're working with, Greg, that it's possible they'll cancel it?
The people that I'm working with are still 100% go.
Yes, they are. They were 100% go at this time last year also. At some point, I mean, we'll just have to see how determined they are. That's I have no insight on that.
Actually, I think that's going to end up being up to the city of Houston. I think they would still do it, but George R. Brown belonging to the city of Houston, I think it's going to be up to the city of Houston.
So the thing about that is Houston First is not actually part of the city of Houston. It's a nonprofit that was created to run things for the city, but it's not the city. So when the city wants something, and by city I mean mayor, they bend over backwards to do it. But if they are not instructed specifically, then it is entirely up to Houston First and Houston First management. Now, the woman who was running Houston First, and she was doing a pretty good job, but as soon as she took over, which was just a couple of years ago, there was a total shitstorm, and so she retired, right, pretty quickly. And the guy who was made the interim CEO is the guy who worked with me on Comic Palooza. So, politically, he has an interest in it succeeding and going on every year. So it is absolutely no surprise that they would be saying right now, we're going to have Comic Palooza. But we don't know what the realities are going to look like as it gets closer. So I mean, they will definitely put it on if they think they can pull it off.
So John, I have a question for you.
Sure.
And it's one that I've talked about in this group before, so they've heard it from me before. And that's, I understand authors working in the genres of sci-fi and fantasy having a market at these kinds of events. But what about authors of other genres? So in my case, it's a travel book, a travel memoir, and another member of our group who's not here tonight, she just wrote a novel based on a historical event. And I know I have a costume, and I know she has a costume because I've seen her with it. So I said, why don't we just go in our costumes and try to sell our book? And there have been people who've said, yeah, there's other people at these conventions who are there for one reason or another, but are also interested in things besides science fiction and fantasy.
Yes, and that's true. So Comic Palooza was designed to be a very broad event that covered as many different fandoms as possible. So a lot of times with something that is very particular, like travel, it may not be that it fits into one of these genres, but if you can find a way to make it fit, to have some sort of relationship to the people who are going to be there, it could work. And I'm trying to think of like an example, right? I'm not saying this is it, but just for example, let's suppose that let's say that you had written a book that had come out and it's about traveling in some country, and then there is some superhero story that's largely based in that country, right? There's a tangential thing where you can reach that base. So that kind of thing might be very useful, and that's really a stretch, that particular one I gave you, but that was like with 4 seconds of thinking. What it really comes down to is salesmanship. You know, I mean, you got costumes you can dress up in. Where's this place that you were sending them to in your book? You know, you have an entire booth. You don't have to sit behind the table. When I used to be a dealer at conventions, I used to sell comic books, I used to sell games, I used to sell all kinds of stuff. And there was a psychology behind booth sales that is different from selling elsewhere, other kinds of things. So like there's a gaming convention that's been held, you know, every year for, I don't know, 40 years at Rice University. And it's called OwlCon. And, you know, my store, I sold a lot of games, Dungeons and Dragons, board games, stuff like that. And I started out like everybody else. I had a table and I set some stuff on it and I waited for people to come by and they would buy some stuff. And over the years, because I sold there every single year, I developed new strategies. So I got the booth near the front. And what I did is I pushed my tables back against the wall, and then I had fixtures on each side that I brought out. So it was a space that you came into instead of walking past. Like you hit that table and you just glide along that table onto the next table, down the aisle, and you're gone, right? Mine, you come to it, and it was a thing that you walked into. And I had a gimmick, right? So I'd sell a ton of this crap, but I had a gimmick. I had a scoop of dice. I grabbed a ladle from my kitchen, and I used to buy bulk dice. Gamers love dice, right? And I took a 5-gallon jug and I cut a big hole in the top, and they'd pay some money, and whatever dice they got in one scoop, they got. And people would come in and they would do this year after year. They just loved it. But what it did is it got them into the booth, right? They came into the booth for $5 or $6, and then they looked around at everything. And, you know, if you're selling travel books and sell travel, you're not just a book. You've got the book to sell, but sell them on being somewhere. You know, make coming into your booth getting away, you know, and make them feel like they want to go there. One thing in the pandemic, everybody wishes they had a chance to go someplace, you know, and that's a huge advantage over a lot of other kinds of niche books. So, you know, I would say work on your booth and spend some real time thinking about it. When you're doing dishes, that's when I think about book ideas, is doing dishes, cooking, and that's when I think about this stuff. And, you know, come up with things that you can do for that booth. What place are you taking them to in your book, Julie?
You're talking, I'm spinning in my head. It's going to be travel to a land far, far away, or a time far in the past, something like that. That's our 2 books. My book is in Spain, and it's covers including the medieval Crusader period. So my costume is a Crusader pilgrim costume. I don't have a sword, but I think I'm gonna have to get a sword and have it there. And I don't know.
A book about the Crusader period. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, that sounds great.
And period, but that period is covered in the book. So it's about the
but
you need a sword, Julie?
Huh?
I have a couple.
Julie, just so you know, those ornaments that you said you were selling over Christmas,
Yeah.
bring those. People will buy those just as quick too.
Don't worry, I'm gonna have those there. They're literary ornaments, you know. So I have William Shakespeare and Jane Austen. And
sure.
Anyway, yeah.
Take it all. Take it all. And if you have a costume like from the medieval period, people will come and talk to you. And there is a lot of interest in that. Fantasy is big. You are fantasy adjacent if you're talking about the Crusades. So that's not that big a stretch for that sort of event.
Right. And myth, you know, St. James appearing on a charger leading the Spanish into battle against the infidels, against the Muslims. is a big part of the whole mythology of St. James.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, Julie, that's great. You got some great ideas there. That was brilliant, John. I love talking marketing and just getting creative and brainstorming. This is awesome. Anybody else have any questions for John? We got just a few more minutes.
I had one.
Okay, James.
John, why did you sell Comic-Con? It sounds like it was a great business.
Okay, so it's Comic Palooza.
Comic Palooza, sorry. Maybe that's why, maybe in the name.
So, first of all, originally, I mean, Houston First had an interest in Comic Palooza, small interest, for a very long time. And the reason I sold them a little bit originally was because once they had partial ownership, it made it a lot easier for me to have contract negotiations with them. So, you know, it's a very different world. You know, you have an event like this, and you're going out to the convention bureau for a city that mainly has medical and oil and gas conferences. So the people that I dealt with there recommended that I sell a little bit to them so that in the future, if there were changes, which actually happened very shortly thereafter, if there were changes in the people there, they would have a continued interest in my success. You always, if you can manage it, you want to have other people to have an interest in your success. That's always a good thing, okay? So they had a little interest from the start, and that meant that I had a partner over there. And 2015, so to be honest, 2015 was a very rough year. You remember the Memorial Day floods? The big flood from 2015?
I'm not in Texas. I'm
He's
in
not in
Virginia.
Texas, but the rest of us remember that, yes.
The Memorial Day flood was the biggest flood we'd had in, what was it, like 100 years? Something like that. That was the weekend of Comic Palooza that year. So I had this huge cast list, and we did well. We had a lot of people come, but I was actually hoping for a lot more. And it was a very rough year, and I thought I'm gonna have to you know, raise some more cash. So I sold off another portion, a little bit bigger portion. Now, when I did that, that kind of changed the dynamics, right? And it wasn't just me with a silent partner, then it was me with an active partner. And when you get into that, that's a lot like marriage. And some marriages you like better than other marriages. So, you know, after a couple of years, I sold my portion out and decided I would go and do other things myself. So as it turns out, I was extremely fortunate because the business, I had always pushed to grow that business as fast as possible because I knew that the increase in money was going to mean drastic increases in expenses. And that was another reason why I wanted Houston First with me, because they have a much bigger pocketbook than I do. But the fact is, as fast as Comic Palooza grew, the expenses were growing faster than the revenue increase. And so, like, by 2016, as soon as 2016, 2017, instead of getting a guest for maybe $60,000 or $70,000 for the weekend and paying them at the end of the weekend, you might have to, by, you know, just a couple of years later, you might have to get a guest for $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 for the weekend and pay them months in advance. And so basically, I was very lucky to decide to sell before it was so expensive that I would not have been able to do it anyway.
So let me ask you this. Did the popularity of it then drive the cost up as you got a little bit more popular, more well-known? Did it actually drive your cost up?
It wasn't the popularity of Comic Palooza. It was It was the insatiable demand for bigger and bigger stars. So, for example, in 2015, I had oh my God, I blank on names. I tend to blank on names when I think of when I'm trying to think of them. His name starts with an R. Hawkeye in the Avengers, right? I can't think of his name.
Robert Ryan. Ryan.
No.
Renner.
Renner. Yeah, Renner. I had Renner.
Jeremy Renner.
Jeremy Renner. I was the first person to have Jeremy Renner as a guest anywhere, and he's an Avenger, right? He was $150,000, but he's not the most exciting Avenger. He's not someone I wanted to put $150,000 in. But at that time, you had to have a guest like that, right? I was trying to get Evans, Captain America. That guy, it didn't matter how much that would cost, it would have made money. But his agent said he doesn't want to do them. He's not doing them, not doing them, not doing them. Jeremy Renner comes to Comicpalooza. He has a great time all weekend. He calls up his buddy Evans. He says, hey, you should have done this with us. He says, oh man, I wish I'd known about it, because the agent never told him. So Renner is not that big, right? I had to have him. And a lot of times you build in a certain amount of your budget around guests that you're not going to get your money back from. So I lost, I don't know, probably $70,000 on Renner. Evans, because he heard about Renner at Comicpalooza, he thought, oh wow, that sounds like fun. He went to Utah, right? And he went there. It was like the next event that he could do, and they booked him for $150,000 or $200,000. He made almost $300,000. That's expensive. When I started, getting someone for $30,000 in 2010 was expensive. By 2015, you're talking $250,000. So it is a very expensive business to be at the, at the upper end. The expenses are really high, and you have to be generating piles of money, and you only get paid once a year.
Yeah.
What was that?
Athena was saying something.
Okay. But
Are we going to find out what she was saying?
I was saying that's why San Diego was $800 for the entrance ticket.
yeah. Well, no, actually, San Diego is completely different. They don't have any of the same expenses. They don't pay for their celebrities to be there.
Yeah.
They don't pay anything for their celebrities to be there. Dragon Con is the same way. But everybody else has to pay. So, but it's just because they're that big. So that's, you're always trying to get to that level, but it's really hard to get to the point where you don't have to pay people.
Very, very risky too, I can tell. Wow.
It is, yeah.
Willing to step out there and risk it all. So that's great.
Yeah.
I loved everything you said, John. It's been absolutely wonderful. Anybody have one quick last question? One more time. We have time for maybe one more. If not, it is 8 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and say again, thank you, John. Would love to, we'll see what happens, but I look forward to getting in touch with you and talking about what you had mentioned when we first got on tonight. So
that's great.
John has some plans, and so I look forward to communicating with you. I have your email address. I'll send you a quick one, so you'll have mine, and then we'll stay in touch. For the rest of you, thank you all for being here. It's great to see you. I told Amy, call me anytime to fill in for her. So we'll see you on Friday for the mastermind. And Vola, are you saying something that you want us to hear? Because you're muted. Okay. I didn't know if you were talking to me or not. So, okay. So thanks again, John. I'll be in touch with you, and the rest of you have a great week.
See you later. Bye.